you don't want to get these wet, and you just want to take a dry paper towel and just pat dry these drag washers. To extend the life of your drag washers, you should back off your drag between every trip and all off season. That'll extend the life of your drag washers. I change out my drag washers every 3 to 5 years, depending on use. These ones here are only 2 years old, so we're in good shape. And these are very easy. They're fairly inexpensive. I think for around $20 you can replace your drag washers, and maybe even less money than that. And it's just a good routine maintenance, like I said, every 3 to 5 years. Obviously, if you're not backing off in your drag, it might be a little bit more often, more like 2 or 3 years, that you're going to have to replace them. But if you have any problems with your drag pressure, your drag slipping when your drag is all the way tightened down, it's a good indicator it's time to replace your drag washers. That's all it is to cleaning these drag washers. You don't want to get them wet. Definitely don't want to put them in any solution. Just pat dry them off and get as much of that old grease off as possible. So now we're going to reassemble our drive shaft. So I'm going to get my part out. I'm also going to get my bearing out. That's one thing we haven't done yet. Bearings, all you're going to do is similar to the drag washers, just dry them by hand. Get as much off as you can. Maybe get a cotton swab. The bearings are actually all internal inside of there's a little shield in here that is shielding the actual ball bearings from getting dirty. So you just want to make sure it's clean. Yeah, so this here, there's little grooves on the inside of this that will snap into this little spring-loaded piece. Hard to see. Let me see if I can show you. You see that white piece there? There are little grooves on that little plastic washer that will snap over that white piece. Put that on. Should look like that. So then this part goes on. Again, just dabbing my finger in it. This is just to protect the piece. You know, moisture gets in there, it'll kind of help roll off that water. So that's going to go on. There's a top and a bottom to this. The bottom is a little bit flatter than the top. So the bottom goes down. So I might just put a drop of oil, even just on my finger, and just rub the outside of this bearing. Sometimes if you get any noise while you're reeling, it's this bearing right here that's causing the noise. And like I said, that cavity where this bearing was the dirtiest, and it can cause a little bit of sound. I'll just put a little bit of oil on the opposite side where it's going to be going in. That goes in. Then our little washer. And then finally our C-clip. So this is reassembled. Now I'm going to take a drop of oil, or maybe a couple drops of oil, drop it into that cavity. Now obviously that's too much oil, but I'm going to take a Q-tip. It's going to soak up some of that oil. I'm just going to spread it around there nice. And then this is going to go back in. You're going to line it up the screw holes. I got my 2 little screws here. So this step is where this part where the screws go in. When I said there was a top and a bottom, this is where that matters, because if you did it the other way around, you'll see that it looks backwards, and you're gonna have to take them all apart again and flip it around. So just make sure the flat part is facing downwards so that when it goes down into the reel, it'll be flat, and then the rounded top will be facing upwards towards you. Alright, so now my drive shaft's back in. I'm going to take a little bit of grease. I'm going to put it inside the teeth of these 2 gears. Just put a little bit on my finger. Just dab it in. And I'm just going to spin it around. You don't need too much. And it'll kind of spread itself around as you spin it. It'll kind of spread in between the teeth just a little bit more. Okay, so now we can begin assembling our main gear system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this one here. This one doesn't need any, but I do just put a little bit on this gear, this little bit of grease, just to protect it from some of the moisture it's gonna end up encountering. Just get it in between there a little bit. This one has a top and the bottom as well. We're going to put obviously the bottom facing downward. And we may end up having to rearrange the actual placement of these once we get everything installed. But for now, I just drop that in there. Main gear, put that ready. Get my drag washer. So here's where you can kind of customize this portion on your own. If you're somebody who likes a smooth drag but don't need a ton of drag pressure, you put a little bit more grease on. Or if you're like me and I prefer drag pressure over the smoothness of drag, you put a little bit less on drag grease on here. So I don't need much. I just put a few dabs on my finger and a little bit front and back. And I take my fingers and just kind of pat it around like this. Now I like it just so it's tacky. It just feels just tacky. Just kind of your fingers stick to it a little bit. Just a little bit more. Just like that. So it just feels sticky. And that's where I like it. And put that aside for a second. I was just going to put a little bit, just coat the interior of this just a little bit. You don't need much because you're going to be putting that drag washer in there. So this is mostly just to protect the piece. While I'm here, I'll get the other side. I'm not even going to reapply it to my fingers. They already have enough on there. Just enough. I'm going to drop this back inside. Take my other one, same thing. You just want it a little bit tacky. If you're somebody who wants it a little bit more on there, smoother drag, less drag pressure, just a little bit more. You don't need a ton. You don't want to. I've opened up reels that have just grease slathered on there, and it's just too much. It makes a big mess in your reel, and it doesn't do anything but give you a hard time keeping your drag dial down. So this one I'm just going to put down here. It'll sit on top of there. And then this is the lock. I'll just plenty on my hands right now, so I'm not even reapplying. It's probably a little too much. You really don't have to go crazy with it. And then this piece goes right on top. There is a lip. You can see it like that. That's face up. I'm going to just drop that on there. I'm going to dry my hands off. Now before I put this back on, I'm going to get this portion ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is put this plastic piece on. The little ramps on there, you can see them as they angle upward. And where this attaches on the reel, they have an opposite ramp that these are going to slide into, and this is what slides up and down as you engage your spool. So what I do is I just put a little bit of grease on each of those ramps. Again, you really don't want to overdo it on this stuff. So this piece, that's where your spool attaches, so it's going to go inside, and this will be facing out. So that piece that I just put in, I'm going to have to pull it out just a little bit. Or you may just want to take it out completely and just put it around this, like so. And just put it right back on. There we go. So now this piece is ready. Just to go right back on my reel. All set. Now I'm not going to put my yoke springs on yet because I want to get the grease in between these teeth. Now this is another place where people overdo it. You do not need that much. What I have on my finger here is too much. I don't need all that. I'm just going to start putting it, just barely touch the teeth and just dab it into a few areas. Kind of spread it out like that. And then I'm going to start spinning it, and it's going to spread it itself out on its own. If you put too much in, it just gets everywhere, and it's going to clog up your reel. It's just bad. So you just need... This is really just to protect the reel. This is not making your reel any smoother. The smoothness of your reel is your bearings and the contact points on your teeth. So really don't want to overdo it on the grease. Now we can put our yoke springs on. I just put them right on like that. And each spring gets a drop of oil. That's it. So while I'm here, I'm also going to give, there's a little spring right there. There it is. One drop of oil on that as well. Now that that's all reassembled, I'm going to start taking apart all these other pieces. So we have bearings in here we're taking apart, and let me show you how to do that. And I'm going to take that out, and just by hand. Actually, there's also a little metal washer that came off with it, so just be careful of that. And I'm just going to clean that with my hands. I want to make sure I clean this interior. Well, I'm going to actually do it with a dry cotton swab. Just make sure this takes off all the old grease. This bearing in here, you can actually get a tool and pop it right out. It's in there pretty well. Go in from the opposite side and try to pop it out. There it goes. So now I can clean off this bearing. Put that off to the side. Fresh cotton swab. And now I'm going to take out these bearings. It's a stack. There are, I believe, 2 bearings and then a couple of spacers in there. So to take it out, there is a little clip. And I have to pry that out. So I get that in here. And once you get one end out, it should be really pretty easy. Comes right out, looks like that. Just a retainer clip. And now, with that out, whoop, you can see these bearings will come out. So there's one bearing. The other ones I believe are going to come out the other side. No. There's another retainer here. There it is. And this will actually come out that same side. So there we go. So yeah, two bearings and a spacer is what it ended up being. So just going to clean off these bearings. Alright, so before I reassemble this, I'm going to take a cotton swab, dip it in some rubbing alcohol, and clean out the area completely. Make sure there's no dirt or grease in there. Alright, so now we're ready to reassemble this part. So like I said, it goes small bearing, spacer, big bearing. Now I'm going to take a drop of oil, just put it on my finger, and coat this bearing, just like that. And I'm going to drop it on in there. Use my tool to kind of push it down there, make sure it's flat. There we go. Another drop of oil in there. I'll take a fresh cotton swab and help spread that oil around in there. Make sure everything's turning freely. Alright, I got my spacer. Drop that in there. Push it down. Okay, looking good. And my last bearing, the big one. Put a drop on there. Just coat around it. Just drop it in. Give it another drop or two while I'm here. Again, I've got my swabs to soak up any excess. I just want to make sure it's nice and smooth. And now I can reinstall that clip. Now I can put this bearing back in. Just do a drop of oil. Just rub it by my hands. And this part here, I might put a little drop of oil on the interior, spread it around with my Q-tip, and then just drop that bearing in there. Okay, so now we are going to reassemble this back onto here completely. So now this piece here, like I said, locks down in there. So I didn't put it back into this side plate where I took it out. And I'm just going to take a drop of oil on here, coat it by hand. It's going to slide up in there. So I want to, because this is a little key, right? And on the opposite side of that gear are the holes, the spaces to put that in. It's very important. Otherwise, when you're screwing everything back in, it's not going to sit correctly, and you're going to have to take it all apart again. So I just line that up. And don't forget our washer. I'll put that up on there. And the last thing I do before I put that back on, I like to just take a little bit of grease and get the teeth in here. This is where everything's going to be screwing in. The drag, the star drag screws in. I just like to put a little bit in there. Makes it go in a little bit easier. Before I put this back together, I did want to remember to show you the part that I removed. So normally this reel comes stock with an additional C-clip on this side plate here. It clips in here and it keeps the side plate from coming off. That pops in right there. And that's the only thing keeping that spool from coming off. So I just snapped mine off. I never replaced it and put it back in. So now I can just freely take off this piece. I just wanted to show you that before we reassembled. So now we take this, just going to put it back in, you kind of shimmy it around a little bit until it sits down flush, okay? And you're going to push down, and now you're going to reinstall all of those screws, okay? Now you might have to hold in one of these bearings, so just kind of keep that in mind. So I kept all my screws up here. So you're going to want to make sure this bearing right here is flush. If it is not, it's because that part I showed you before isn't inside the grooves, and you're not going to be able to get your the rest of this reel back together. So it should look like that. So we have this small washer. That's the first one to go on. Is. Now they should go against each other and they should cup. So there should be they are little cup shapes and they should be going up against each other. See if you can see that. See how there's a little gap like that? They cup against each other. That's what it should look like. And then those two pieces slide on. So I like to keep them together, so when I'm reassembling, I know they maintain that position. There we go. This has a little washer on the back, and then that's going to screw in. So I can hold the shaft a little bit and just screw that in. I like to screw that in pretty tight at this time. It's just going to help out in a minute. you will see. So then we have this spring, and there's a little groove in here that just pops right into that groove. And if you want, you can maybe just do a little bit of oil around there. It doesn't, not much, just enough. Rub it around in there, nice. Now before we go any further, we're going to put this piece on. I'm going to clean that out a little bit. So there's a little carbon piece that's on the inside. You can take that out. And just put a tiny bit of grease on there. Not a whole lot. Just kind of helps it grip down there is all. I take a little bit of oil and I put it inside the threads. Now it's going to help it screw on. This came off. There we go. You don't have to tighten it up all the way, you just want it there because it's easier to get that on before the handle's on. So now we're going to get this piece on here. And I might clean that up a little bit too. I'm going to put that in there and I'm going to push it down, okay? So you're going to feel it push down. Look at all that room we have up here. Very important. You want to get that down. You want as much room as possible. That's why we tighten down that piece. Put your handle on. We get our nut. We get that on. Ooh. We get that on as straight as we can. We start tightening it by hand. Then we get our wrench again. And we're going to tighten that on pretty tight. So now what I do is I test my drag and make sure I get enough clicks in there. So that's good, right? 1, 2, 3. That's right around where it was. Perfect. So this goes back on and you want to line up the screw hole. So that pops back on. It should pop into place. If it doesn't, you have to adjust your nut just a touch until this finds the grooves. There we go. And my last screw will go into place. Now this side plate is completely on, and we're in good shape. And now we can begin to work on this side. So, only thing I have to do on here, I'm going to clean off this piece, and then I'm going to take off this bearing, clean off the interior, put it back in, and just make sure that this whole exterior here is cleaned off. So again, this has a little retainer clip in here. So I'm just going to come and pry that off. put that off to the side. Now this bearing could be a little tricky to get out. You kind of have to get underneath it. This is kind of where sometimes having an angled one helps a little bit. You can kind of get the right angle. There it goes. And then just same thing, take this bearing, clean it off by hand. Take this in here. Make sure everything is good to go. This part here is dirty, so make sure that's cleaned out. In fact, I'm going to take the spring out and get underneath here. So once you're satisfied, I take a drop of oil and I put it in here. That's where the bearing's going to go. Take the bearing, and I put a drop of oil on there, rub it around, same thing. Slide that back into place. Push it down. Put another drop of oil on the top. Spread around. And I'm going to take this clip, put it back in. Take this spring, put a drop of oil on there. It's not necessary, but I am going to keep it in place. Now that's all set. And the last thing we have to clean now is our spool. I engage 2 brakes and I use 2 brakes all the time, so every other year I just swap them out. So for the spool, I just take a paper towel and I moisten just a little bit with my rubbing alcohol. And I will rub it all in here. This is going to get pretty dirty, so it needs some pretty bulk cleaning. I take a drop of oil onto each one of my brakes. Even a half a drop. And remember, no oil on here. You want to just clean this off. No oil on either side. So then this spool will go back in. And we'll put in our side plate. And lock it back. And that's it, guys. Cleaned reel, ready to go this year. Alright guys, so that's it. I hope you didn't find that to be too bad. It's pretty easy cleaning out the Baitcast reels, like I said. So hopefully watching this you're able to feel more confident doing your own reels. So if you like this video, give me that like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. Next week we're going to be doing spinning reels. We'll see you then.